I was sitting in a high-end cafe in Seoul's Gangnam district last month, watching a young couple at the table next to me. They were dressed impeccably. I mean, labels that cost more than a month's rent. But they weren't talking. For an hour, they just sat there in a sort of sterile, high-definition silence, scrolling through their phones while sipping these $30 lattes. When I struck up a conversation with the man later, I asked him if he ever thought about starting a family in this glittering neighborhood. His reaction wasn't what I expected at all. He didn't look sad or even stressed. He just laughed. It was this dry, detached sound. And he pulled up an Excel spreadsheet on his phone. He'd calculated the NTV of a child, the net present value. Between the private hagwon tutors, the hyper-competitive Seoul housing market, and just the sheer cost of maintaining their current social status, the bottom line was deeply in the red. A child isn't a person here, he told me, and his eyes just drifted back to his screen. A child is a luxury asset that depreciates your own survival. To him, the decision to remain childless wasn't some tragedy. It wasn't the failure of traditional values. It was a cold, optimized survival strategy. He spoke about his bloodline ending with him, not with regret, but with the calm satisfaction of someone who had just won a high-stakes poker game by folding early. But then the conversation shifted. I mentioned that the government was planning to increase cash subsidies for new parents, basically offering to pay people to have babies. And his expression immediately hardened. The detached observer just vanished, and he was replaced by this flash of genuine anger. He called the subsidies insulting, a band-aid on a terminal wound. He argued that the system wanted his offspring to fuel the corporate machine, but it refused to give him the space or the time to actually be a father. That sudden transition from this rational, spreadsheet-driven indifference to a fierce biological resentment, that is the pulse of modern East Asia. It suggests that the plummeting birth rates in Seoul and Tokyo aren't just a demographic crisis we could fix with task breaks. They are something much more profound. A collective biological impeachment of the modern world. It's a silent revolution where millions of people have looked at the cost to the future and collectively decided to opt out.
It is a chilling story, isn't it? But honestly, that man in the cafe, he perfectly encapsulates this massive stack of data we have in front of us for this deep dive. And when I say massive, I mean it. We are looking at, government budgets, sociological surveys from Tokyo, housing data from Seoul, and labor statistics that, frankly, they look like typos.
They felt like typos when I first read them, really. But before we get too deep in the weeds, let's just set the stage a bit for everyone. We are talking about the demographic collapse in East Asia, specifically South Korea and Japan. But we aren't just talking about numbers going down. We're trying to figure out why they are going down, especially when the government is throwing the kitchen sink at the problem.
Exactly. This isn't a story about a lack of effort. Since 2006, South Korea alone has poured approximately $270 billion into these pro-netless policies. That is about 390 trillion won figure.
270 billion. I'm just trying to visualize that. That's more than the entire GDP of some mid-sized countries. That's a moonshot budget. You could probably build a colony on Mars for that kind of money.
It is a moonshot budget. And the hypothesis behind all that spending was, it was simple. Classical economics 101, price and demand. The government thought, okay, children are expensive. If we make them cheaper, demand will rise. So they funded cash handouts, baby vouchers, medical subsidies. They essentially tried to coupon their way out of extinction.
It's the rebate logic, right? Like, if sales of electric cars are down, the government offers a tax credit, and suddenly everyone goes out and buys a Tesla. They applied car dealership logic to human reproduction.
They treated having a baby like buying a durable good. But the result wasn't just a failure. It was a total, undeniable collapse of that model. In 2006, when the spending blitz began, South Korea's fertility rate was 1.13. Now, that was already dangerously low. But by 2023, after spending that $270 billion, it didn't go up. It plummeted to a world record low of 0.72.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, we talk about the replacement rate a lot in demographics. Yep. The magic number is 2.1 children per woman, just to keep a population stable, right?
Correct. 2.1 is stability. Anything below that, you start to shrink. 0.72 is a demographic freefall. It's mathematical extinction over a long enough timeline. And if you zoom in on Seoul, the capital, the very epicenter of all this investment, the rate is 0.55.
0.55. So statistically, we're looking at barely half a child per woman per lifetime.
Wow. So the core mystery we are diving into today is exactly what I saw in that cafe. Why did demand fall while subsidies rose? Why is this not a failure of policy execution, but, as that man put it, a rational calculation by the citizens? It feels like the government is pulling a lever that isn't connected to the machine anymore. To understand that disconnect, we have to unpack this fundamental difference between a transactional cost and a structural cost. This is a distinction that appears in, almost every piece of sociological research we have here. The government policies, the cash, the vouchers, these treat having a child as a transaction. They assume the barrier is the price tag at the checkout counter.
Okay, so they think, here's $10,000 to cover diapers, formula, maybe a stroller. Now you can afford the kid. It's sort of a reimbursement model.
Right, but the costs facing that man in Gangnam or a young woman in Tokyo are structural. They are embedded in the very architecture of their society. We're talking about the education system, the housing market, and the brutal labor culture. You can write a check for $10,000, but that check does not offset the opportunity cost of sacrificing a career, your social status, and your mental health for 18 plus years.
This connects right back to his anger. He called the subsidies insulting. I remember thinking that was such a strong word at the time. Who gets insulted by free money? But if you look at it through this lens, he's basically saying, you're offering me pennies to compensate for the fundamental destruction of my life as I know it.
It's a Band-Aid on a terminal wound. Perfect. It acknowledges the expense, but it completely ignores the alienation. And to really see why this cash-first approach fails so spectacularly, we have to look at where it doesn't fail as badly. We need to contrast the East Asian model with, say, the Nordic model.
Okay, let's look at Finland or Denmark. I know their birth rates are also declining. It's a global trend for sure. But they aren't at 0.72. They aren't in free fall.
No, they are significantly higher. And the difference isn't just culture. It's the delivery mechanism of welfare. South Korea and Japan have adopted this top-down cash injection approach into a very rigid system. The Nordic model, let's take Finland as an example, is based on service-based welfare.
Service-based? So you mean they actually do things for you, rather than just giving you money to go find the service yourself in a broken market?
High taxes, yes, but very high spending on services. Universal, high-quality daycare that you don't have to fight to get into. Education that is free and not hyper-competitive. Active labor market policies that support parents. The Danish model has this concept they call flexicurity.
Flexicurity sounds a bit like a marketing term, but break it down for us.
It stands for flexibility and security. It gives security to employees, robust unemployment benefits, retraining programs, but it gives flexibility to the market to hire and fire as needed. The result is a system that bends. If you have a kid in Denmark, the system bends to accommodate that child. The services are capacitating. That's a key word in the literature. They build the capacity for parents, especially mothers, to remain in the workforce.
Whereas in East Asia,
in East Asia, the system is brittle. It doesn't bend, it breaks. You have this reliance on what's called private welfare, meaning your family, usually your mother or mother-in-law, has to help, or you have to pay for it all yourself. And you have these corporate structures that demand absolute, undivided devotion.
So in Seoul, the government injects cash, but the container of society, the impossible work hours, the lack of quality childcare, the immense pressure, that doesn't change one bit.
The fundamental conflict is between the so-called Confucian work ethic, which prioritizes long hours, face time, total loyalty to the firm, and the modern necessity of a dual-income household. The Nordic model supports the lifestyle of parenting. The East Asian model just tries to subsidize the cost while making the lifestyle itself almost impossible.
It's like paying someone to swim across a fast-moving river. You can offer them $1 million, but if you refuse to let them come up for air, the money doesn't matter. They're still going to drown. And speaking of drowning, we have to talk about the specific weights dragging people down. We have to talk about education.
The hagwon culture. This is the heavy artillery of the South Korean childhood experience.
I've seen these places. For those listening who don't know, hagwons are private cram schools in South Korea.
Yeah.
But calling them cram schools feels like a massive understatement. It sounds more like a military operation. You see these buses late at night ferrying elementary school kids around the city like they're shifting troops from one front to another.
It is an arms race. That is the only accurate way to describe it. We have data showing South Korean families spend roughly 25% of their household income on private education. But the dynamic here is crucial. It's not just about doing well. It is about outcompeting your peers at all costs.
It's totally zero-sum. If I win, you lose. It's not enough for my kid to be smart. He has to be smarter than your kid.
Completely. We call this the class filter. Education there isn't just about learning. It's a simulation of adult competition starting from age 5. Children grow up with what sociologists call the one-coin mentality.
Like an old arcade game. You get one life.
Imagine you're playing a game where you have One coin, one life, one chance. If you fail the exam, the game is over. There is no retry button. There is no gap year to go find yourself in Europe. And this pressure starts incredibly early. We're talking elementary school kids in these academies until 9 or 10 p.m. every night.
I read about the status externality regarding this. It's an economic concept, right? It says that parents value their child's education relative to others. So if everyone spends more money on tutoring, the average test score goes up, the bar for success just moves higher.
But the number of spots at the elite universities, the so-called SKY universities, that's Seoul National, Korea, and Yonsei, remains exactly the same. That is the tragedy of it. The collective expenditure rises, the collective stress explodes, but the collective outcome, the number of successful elite graduates, is static. It's like everyone's standing up at a concert to see better. No one sees any better, but now everyone is standing and miserable.
And paying a fortune for the privilege of standing. Believable.
And this brings us right back to your friend in the cafe and his Excel spreadsheet, the net present value of a child.
To apply corporate finance terms to a baby, what's the ROI on this infant? It feels almost dystopian to even say it out loud.
It is cold, but for the people living inside this system, this is the key. In this system, a child is an investment with a guaranteed negative return. But it's not just the financial loss, it's the fear of downward mobility.
It's not, can I feed this kid? It's, will this kid be able to live as well as I do, or better?
The middle class in Seoul and Tokyo are absolutely terrified that their children will fall out of the middle class. The competition is so fierce that reproducing feels like setting someone you love up for failure. So the rational choice, the dignity-preserving calculus, as one paper called it, is to end the bloodline at its peak.
Better to end the bloodline at its peak than to produce a child who will suffer a lower status. That is profound and very, very dark. It reframes childlessness from a failure into a kind of protective mercy. You're saving your hypothetical child from the rat race by not letting them enter it in the first place.
It is a protective mercy, exactly. And this calculus isn't just happening in education. It is deeply tied to the physical space they occupy. We have to talk about housing.
Right. The prerequisite for legitimacy. In the West, or at least where I grew up, you see people having kids in apartments or before they own a home. It's pretty common. But in East Asia, the sequence of events seems much, much stricter.
It is absolutely rigid. In South Korea and Japan, marriage is the exclusive gateway to childbirth. 98% of births in South Korea occur within marriage. Compare that to the OECD average, where that number is much lower. Lots of children are born out of wedlock in France or Sweden, for example. But in East Asia, the cultural stigma against single parenthood is immense.
So no marriage equals no kids. That shuts the door on a huge percentage of potential births right there.
And here's the link. You cannot get married, culturally speaking, without a house. Particularly for men, there is this deep-seated expectation. A man without property is unmarriageable. It's an unspoken rule that everyone follows.
Yeah. What does a house cost in Seoul? Because I know real estate is crazy everywhere, but Seoul is, well, it's notorious.
In Seoul, the average home cost is approximately 18 times the median household income.
18 times. Let's compare that. New York City is famous for being expensive.
NYC is about 8 times the median income. London is about 12. Seoul is 18. It is in a league of its own. So just think about the chain reaction that this sets off. Couples have to delay marriage for years just to save for this impossible deposit.
And delayed marriage leads directly to delayed fertility.
And delayed fertility leads to fewer children, or often no children at all. By the time they finally have the key to the apartment, the biological window has started to close, or they are so utterly exhausted by the effort that they just stop at one child.
This has birthed a whole generation with a specific name for this, hasn't it? The NPO generation.
The NPO generation. Po means giving up in Korean. Originally, it was the Sampo generation, giving up 3 things: dating, marriage, and childbirth. Then it became Oppo, 5 things, adding home ownership and careers to the list. Now it is just NPO, the generation that has given up on N number of things, everything, hope included.
That is just heartbreaking. If you give up on the future, how do you even live in the present?
You shift your focus entirely. You move from family-centric happiness, which requires long-term investment and sacrifice, to individual-centric happiness. Travel, amazing food, efficiency, buying that luxury handbag you've been eyeing. It's not just vanity. It's a consolation prize for a life past that has been permanently closed off.
It's the small but certain happiness trend, isn't it? Buying a really, really nice coffee because you can't buy a house.
Exactly, and enjoying the silence. Which brings us to the other major scarcity. We've talked about money and space, but the most critical resource for these people is time.
Time poverty. This section of our research really struck me. We have this header in our notes. The 11,900-hour work year. Now, looking at the data, South Koreans work about 200 hours more than the OECD average per year. That 11,900 figure might be a bit of a poetic way to describe the cumulative career pressure or the feeling of endless labor, but the reality is undeniable. They are working themselves to the bone.
The numbers are stark. That 200-hour difference is basically an extra month of full-time work every single year compared to their peers in other developed nations, and that doesn't even include the commute.
The commute is legendary. I've seen those videos of the Tokyo subways where platform pushers literally shove people into the cars to get the doors to close.
In Tokyo and Seoul, a 2-hour daily commute is normalized. It's not an exception, it's the routine. So you work incredibly long hours, you commute for 2 hours on top of that. When do you date? When do you raise a child? When do you sleep?
We have a case study here, a man named Kenji from Tokyo. He's a middle manager, and he breaks it down to an hours calculation that is just staggering.
Kenji is the archetype of the single-person economy. He views a child not as a bundle of joy, but as a direct cost of roughly 40,000 hours of his remaining life.
40,000 hours.
Yeah.
That's so vivid. How did he even get to that number?
If you calculate the care, the worry, the extra work to pay for the kid, the time spent at hagwons, it adds up. Kenji's entire life is optimized for efficiency. He eats alone, which is very easy to do in Tokyo, with solo ramen booths where you don't even have to speak to the waiter. He uses automated laundry services. He goes to the gym for self-optimization.
He told the researcher that he chooses the loneliness economy. His gaming rigs, his cats, the silence. Not because he's antisocial, but because silence is the only luxury he can actually afford.
We often judge these herbivore men or NPO youth as selfish or lazy. But Kenji argues this isn't selfishness at all. It is a rational response to a system where time is the scarcest and most precious resource. If you give up your time to a child, you lose the only fragment of autonomy you have left.
It's reclaiming your own life by refusing to share it. But there's another huge side to this refusal. We can't talk about birth rates without talking about the women who are actually expected to give birth. The gender war in South Korea is, well, it's intense.
It is visceral. The Confucian bargain, as they call it, has completely collapsed. The old deal was men provide economic security, women provide caretaking and domestic labor. That was the social contract.
But now women are working. They have to work.
Women are highly educated. In South Korea, 77% of young women have a tertiary education. That's significantly higher than the men, who are at 63%. But, and this is the massive, glaring contradiction, South Korea has the widest gender wage gap in the entire OECD.
So they are more educated, but paid significantly less for the same work.
And they face the dreaded motherhood penalty. In this corporate culture, childbirth is often viewed as a betrayal of the team, a distraction. For many women, it means career termination. They get pushed out. And for those who do try to do both, they face the double burden.
That's working a full-time, high-pressure job and then coming home to do the second shift of cooking, cleaning, and all the childcare.
The data shows that Korean women do 4 to 6 times the amount of housework and childcare compared to men, even in dual-income households. So the deal for women is work like a man, but also mother like a traditional housewife from the 1950s.
And women are looking at that deal and saying, no deal.
It's being called a birth strike.
Okay.
That is the language being used by activists and in the media. We see slogans at protests that say things like, "My womb is not a national public good."
That is a powerful slogan. It directly challenges the government's view of women as just, baby factories for the national GDP.
It is a protest against a system that demands they choose between economic survival and biological continuity. They fear solo parenting, the reality of being left with the entire burden of the penalty while their husband is at the office until 11 p.m. every night. So the refusal to reproduce is a form of leverage. It's the only strike they can go on that the government can't break.
So we have a generation opting out. The population is shrinking fast. And usually the conversation stops there. It's a crisis. We have to fix it. But there's a fascinating pivot in our research. Some governments, particularly in Japan, are starting to accept the decline as inevitable. They're moving from fixing to surviving.
This is the shift to what's called urban resilience. The question changes from how do we make more babies to how does society function when the population halves?
It's a grim question, but a necessary one, I suppose.
Yeah.
If the babies aren't coming, you have to redesign the house for fewer people.
By 2050, projections show the population in half of Japan's residential areas will drop by 50%. We are seeing the emergence of transport deserts, entire areas where buses and trains stop running because there are no drivers to drive them and no riders to pay the fare.
You can't just let entire cities rot from the inside out.
The compact city model. You can look at a place like Utsunomiya City. They are actively restructuring the city to be smaller and denser.
Shrinking the footprint to match the shrinking population.
Exactly. Instead of these sprawling suburbs that are impossible to service with an aging population, they concentrate everyone in a smaller, more manageable core. They are replacing car dependency, which requires a lot of young, alert drivers, with networked public transport like light rail transit systems. It's all about efficiency.
And technology plays a huge role here too, right? We have the story of Mrs. Sato.
Mrs. Sato lives in what they call a thinning prefecture. Her local community center used to be an elementary school. That symbol alone, a school turned into a senior center, tells the whole story, doesn't it?
Yes. And she's not being cared for by a young nurse.
No. The labor shortage is so severe that she is monitored by geriatric care robots checking her vitals. Her groceries and medicines are delivered by automated drones.
It sounds...
Well, it's what the government calls Society 5.0. It's the idea of using technology to maintain a high quality of life even without a human workforce. But there is a catch. There's this concept we're seeing emerge called the affection algorithm.
The rise of digital companions.
If you are lonely and there are no young people around, no grandchildren, you turn to AI, virtual idols, digital pets. Mrs. Sato might be safe and fed by robots, but is she connected? Is she happy?
It's the biosocial stalemate. We can maintain the efficiency of the city, the lights stay on, the automated trains run on time, but it's a sterile world, a hyper-efficient machine managed by machines for an aging, lonely population.
It creates a stark reality, a world that functions perfectly on paper but lacks the messy, chaotic, unpredictable vitality of youth and renewal.
We started with a couple in a cafe, sitting in silence. And we're ending with a vision of a whole society managed by a kind of technological silence.
If we step back and summarize this entire civilizational audit, the conclusion is, well, it's pretty unavoidable. The birth rate collapse in East Asia is not an accident. It is not a mistake. It is the result of a system working too well.
Too well. How can it be working too well if it's leading to extinction?
It works too well at extracting labor. It works too well at enforcing competition. It works too well at turning human beings into efficient, optimized economic units. The Gangnam couple, Kenji and Tokyo, the women on a birth strike, they are all rational actors. They have audited the social contract they were offered and found the balance to be negative.
So this isn't just apathy. You called it a biological non-cooperation movement.
That's what it is. The population decline is a signal. It is a flashing red light on the dashboard of this particular version of modernity. It's telling us that a society that is hyper-competitive, incredibly expensive, and chronically time-poor is, in the end, biologically unsustainable.
That is the thought I want to leave everyone with. We usually measure the success of a country by its GDP, its high-speed trains, its glittering skyscrapers. Seoul and Tokyo have all of that in spades. They are, by all those metrics, successful. But that success has created that high-definition silence I saw in the cafe.
The silence of the empty cradles, it's the loudest sound in the region.
It suggests that unless the structure of society changes, not just throwing more cash at parents, but fundamentally changing the definition of a successful life, the rational choice will continue to be folding early. It's a high-stakes poker game where the only way to win is to walk away from the table.
And millions are walking away, silently.
It's something to think about the next time you see a headline about birth rates. Look past the numbers. Look for the silence. We'll see you next time.